Our founders created the US as a federalist system that split powers between the states and the federal government. Can a city decriminalize marijuana? Can a city add to already onerous construction and labor regulations? Is there any limit to city government? And did all that change when the Death Star bill took effect last year? Today, we're exploring the divide between Texas municipalities and the state government. Let's go. My name is Mac Latimer, and this is Imagine Better. So the start of cities in Texas is a little chaotic. From 1836 to 1858, from being a republic to being a state, the only way to incorporate a city was through legislation. The one constant here was that cities only had the powers expressly mentioned in their charters. Then in 1858, Texas created general law cities. These cities did not have to be approved by the legislature, and they only had powers expressly given to them by the Texas state government. The population requirements and the structures of these cities changed over the years, but the basic concept still remained the same. Then in 1912, the Home Rule Amendment passed for the Texas state constitution, and home rule cities are what we're going to focus on for this video. This amendment provided for the creation of home rule cities in areas with more than 5,000 people. So what is a home rule city? For the first time, instead of having defined powers, cities had any power that wasn't expressly prohibited or preempted by the state of Texas. This increased power substantially. They were now effectively mini states, making public policy on their level as long as the state hadn't spoken. This preemption portion was then watered down 4 years later in 1916 when the Court of Criminal Appeals said the power of the city to act is as general and broad as is the power of the legislature to act. The state now had to specifically say in each law that they were specifically preempting cities from making further laws in that area. Remember that piece, because that's going to come back when we get to the Death Star bill. The number of home rule cities exploded. Today we have 389 home rule cities, and that number has only increased. We could not find a single instance of a city reverting back to a general law city or abolishing itself altogether. Only 30 cities in the state have the population level to become a home rule city and have not done so yet. With the only way to limit these cities' powers being explicit legislation, the back and forth between cities and the state legislature has been dizzying, causing uncertainty and increasing regulations at both the local and the state level. Here are some examples. In 1935, Texas returned alcohol regulation to the cities and counties after Prohibition had been repealed. Cities and counties then returned to pre-Prohibition rules, and some even added more regulations. Then in 1977, the state saw that cities and counties had gone too far when it comes to alcohol regulation. So what they did is they introduced preemption legislation that said, unless otherwise specifically provided by the terms of this code, the manufacture, sale, distribution, transportation, and possession of alcoholic beverages shall be governed exclusively by the provisions of this code. The state then expanded that preemption further in 1987, 1991, 1995, 2001, 2011, 2015, 2019, and 2023. In the 1980s, the city of Richardson adopted bans on certain dog breeds. In 1990, after several legal challenges, the Texas Supreme Court upheld that ban because of lack of explicit preemption at the state level. Then the Texas state legislature created dog regulations and prohibited dog breed-specific ordinances. They added language specifically preempting cities and prohibiting these ordinances. In the early 2000s, after Texas adopted the national minimum wage as its own, there were several cities talking about increasing it even further. In 2003, Texas got ahead of this and prohibited cities specifically from raising minimum wage. In 2004, the city of Denton banned fracking. Instead of challenging it in court, the state legislature just passed legislation prohibiting cities from passing certain oil and gas regulations, and then specified in the oil and gas code that it was specifically preempting city ordinances. Again, they added language specifically preempting the cities and prohibiting these powers. Now, these are just a few examples of the constant struggle between the city and the state. Generally, how it works is cities either talk about or create ordinances, and then the state comes in and creates their own regulations that preempts the cities and then specifically prohibits them from making any more ordinances. This story has occurred with building regulations, business regulations, environmental regulations, political sign regulations, and so much more. In 2017, Governor Greg Abbott declared war on these local regulations. He said that liberal cities were turning Texas into California and that this back and forth strategy equated to firing single rifle shots in an all-out war. Abbott then proposed that Texas eliminate home rule cities altogether and only let cities regulate what the state gives them permission to. He hasn't been able to accomplish this goal yet, as it would take a constitutional amendment, but what he has done is he passed the so-called Death Star bill last year. The right and the left have both sensationalized this law, but it's really a very simple, moderate law. There are two main parts to this bill. The first is to add language like the following to the Texas codes for agriculture, business and commerce, finance, insurance, labor, local government, natural resources, occupations, and property. Unless expressly authorized by another statute, a municipality or county may not adopt, enforce, or maintain an ordinance, order, or rule regulating conduct in a field of regulation that is occupied by a provision of this code. An ordinance, order, or rule that violates this section is void, unenforceable, and inconsistent with this code. This provision tells the Texas Supreme Court and the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals to recognize that preemption limits a city's authority. Theoretically, we are just moving back to constitutionality here. The second provision allows citizens to sue cities violating these rules. But there are all sorts of guardrails on these lawsuits. One, you have to tell the city 3 months in advance that you're going to sue. Two, there are no money damages except for legal fees. And three, if your lawsuit is considered frivolous, you may actually have to pay the city's legal fees. After the governor signed this bill into law, Houston, joined by San Antonio and El Paso, sued the state in a Travis County courtroom, claiming that the law was unconstitutional. That judge ruled in favor of Houston, but what they didn't do is create a statewide injunction striking the law down. Therefore, the law is still in effect now, although no other lawsuits have come down the pipeline. The next significant action in municipal preemption is happening right now. Since 2020, several cities have passed ordinances forbidding police from enforcing marijuana laws, including Austin, San Marcos, Elgin, Denton, and Killeen. Harker Heights did too, but that ordinance never went into effect. Many people have called this act decriminalization, but that's not technically true. Decriminalization is when the legislature takes an offense and reclassifies it from a criminal offense to a civil offense, basically replacing jail time with a fine. These ordinances order police not to enforce the law. Meanwhile, the sheriff's department, DPS, and even constables can still enforce those marijuana laws in the city. You can see how much confusion this would cause in one of these cities. And Texas law isn't even really ambiguous about this. It specifically says that the governing body of a municipality may not adopt a policy under which the entity will not fully enforce laws relating to drugs. So, predictably, the lawsuits started flying. Those lawsuits started at the county level, but at the beginning of this year, the AG and the state sued all 5 of those cities that I mentioned. Now, both the Death Star bill and the marijuana ordinances are still in the court system, so I'll bring you updates as those stories progress. So that's the history of municipal preemption and powers. So what are the problems with it? The first problem is unpredictability. Theoretically, home rule cities had their peak power in 1912, and the state just continuously chips away at those powers. This uncertainty doesn't allow for long-term planning by cities or successful activism by voters. If you are a voter and you don't know whether to lobby the city or the state for a specific policy, that's a problem. The second problem is compounding and growing regulations. The cities will start regulating an area where the state doesn't, and then the state will step in, adding even more regulations to preempt those cities. The effect is a vicious cycle that grows both state and city governments. The third problem is the famous patchwork quilt problem. If you are a small business that's expanding in the state of Texas, you have to deal with nearly 400 different sets of regulations to expand across the state. That amount of regulation cripples small business, which slows the economy and kills jobs. So, with these problems, what are the solutions? Honestly, you just need one solution for this problem, and that's to define the powers of a city. Many people would disagree what those powers should be, but that's okay. Any defined set of powers would be much better than the situation we have now. You could even have a list of powers that cities choose from when they incorporate and create their charter, so that each of those individual cities can decide whether they are going to control parks or they are going to create public libraries. In my opinion, I think cities should probably be limited to 3 powers, and that's running a police department, that's building and maintaining roads, and that's running utilities. So what do you think? Do you think cities should have uncapped powers? Is limiting them to 3 powers too much? Let me know in the comments. If you made it to the end, thank you so much, and here's how you can help us. First, you can click the like button and the subscription and notification buttons if you're on YouTube. Then you can go into the show notes of this video and follow Imagine Better Media on all the social media platforms that you use regularly. After that, please share us with as many people as you can, both in person and online. Finally, you can go to Imagine Better Media and sign up for one of our subscriptions. Thank you so much to our VIP subscribers who help make these videos possible. Let's imagine better and make it happen. And while you're here, you can click here to check out our other stories.